You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. How do you change your organization so that it makes its most critical, valuable decisions based on AI and data? And not just once, but ongoing. And what implications does this have for life sciences and particularly drug discovery? Here to help us find out is Volodymyr Oleksiuk. He is the Director of Scientific Engagement and AI Team Lead at the biological data analysis consulting firm BioLizard. Volodymyr, thank you very much for joining us on the Data Science Leaders podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Volodymyr, you have your PhD in multiomics. Why is biological data so fascinating to you that you're willing not just to go in and spend your entire academic career going and looking at it, but also then, even after all of those years and years, being willing to go in and do this and still find it exciting on a daily basis?
Yes, so actually it come from when I was little. I was always very excited in how biology works, what makes up life, and etc. And that's kind of piqued my interest in biology as a whole. One of the reasons that I completed my bachelor in biochemistry. But what I found it out is that, well, the experimental part of the science is not really up to me. So I was much more comfortable doing computer work. And like the combination of AI and biology is really what excites me the most. That being said, what is particularly interesting for me within the biological space is that there is so much unknown. It's a very complex environment requiring a lot of domain knowledge. And to provide you with a little bit of scope, so we organisms, humans, consist of millions, billions of different cells that all have the same genetic code within them, but they are looking different, they are acting different, they are interacting with each other. Within your genetic code, you have genes, which, well, you have about 60,000 genes in each cell. Some of them are active, others not, which make up the function. All of those genes can be transcribed into transcript, but then you have about 60,000 to 1 million different proteins, depending on how we measure within a cell. And that's just on a very small little scale, right? And then when you think about disease, it's often a reflected or caused through molecular dysfunction within a cell on a very small level, all contributing together to, for example, cancer growing out into tumors. And it's so complex and fascinating that, well, it provides huge opportunities with AI machine learning because you really need to understand the complexity and use AI, data science, analytics to make sense from the data. But it also kind of helps you to dive into the unknown and uncover novel findings that are maybe, well, where you can be part of a novel discovery not found anywhere else in the world. So
Mm. Well, it sounds like there was almost this occasion when you realized that these biology problems were actually data problems. But it sounds like the second part of what you're saying is that it sounds like the worst data problem ever, because in terms of the holes in your data, the lack of completeness of that data, the amount of complexity in that data, sounds like it's an extraordinary challenge. Many would say it sounds like it's an impossible challenge. How have things changed such that you're able to collect enough of that data, even for a particular individual, in a particular patient or a particular test, to be able to go in and analyze this effectively?
yes, so a lot has combined through technological innovation. So historically, like when you were sick, a physician would measure a couple of parameters like perhaps your weight, your fever, your with a little bit more novel technology looking at the tumor or looking at some physiological effects. But right now, technology has made it possible to take a snapshot of, for example, a tissue and look what is happening at the molecular level. And what we need to realize, and it's exactly like you say, it's a very messy environment, very difficult environment to work with data-wise. Even the data that we get and obtain is actually just a proxy of the reality. Like our technologies are very imperfect, and there is no way in that we can go to a show and witness kind of the interaction that happens within a cell. So you use kind of you're looking through a lens and you're only getting a glimpse of what is actually happening. However, because there is so much data available, and it's a problem that a lot of people are working on together, both from the industry and academia. We are getting to a point where there is sufficient data available, then when combined, we can get useful insights from the data itself. That being said, it's still a very challenging environment, because even if we apply AI and machine learning, we need to be very critical about our findings. There is so much unknown factors that influence disease. There's so much variability, even from one human to the others, that each assumption that you can make can have actually real and significant impact in your analysis.
Yeah, the correlation versus causation problem is huge. You think that there's just so many opportunities to identify potentially spurious correlations here. Is there, is that what folks are running frequently run into? And two, is there a way of mitigating that?
It's a very realistic problem that a lot of people run into. And the way to mitigate it is by both leveraging all the scientific and clinical knowledge that is out there. So, um, a lot is already known, both from an academical perspective, both from deep experimentation. We know some mechanism of action of disease. We know some well established kind of mechanisms that we can use in our data analysis and try to gain additional evidence for. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we need to collaborate in a very close manner with biologists, with chemists, with physicians all together to, well, not only approach data from a data perspective way, but also with from a biological perspective, from a chemical perspective, from a clinical perspective, and combine everything together to, well, increase at least the probability of making the right decisions or taking the right course of action, and which experiments to pursue, or to validate some findings that you find from a data analytical perspective and translate them into a clinical setting.
So if I was to summarize, it sounds like, well, the great development was that we were able to get so much more data than before. We have genomic sequencing data and other data that now enables us to capture the signal that's out there. The problem is that, well, it's a massive amount of data, and then you need techniques, machine learning, quote unquote, artificial intelligence, in order to be able to analyze this effectively. But now you run into the problem of things like overfitting, spurious correlations, and others. And really, it's not a pure AI problem. This is a, for lack of a better term, augmented intelligence problem. This is a leveraging the tools and methods in addition to the human expertise. And it sounds like not just doing this once, but doing this in an embedded, ongoing fashion throughout. So
Mhm.
you, it's not a human-based process for drug discovery. It's not an AI-based process for drug discovery. It's an AI infused or an augmented approach to it. Is that the right takeaway?
Exactly. And to kind of put things into perspective, generally, when you start from a disease and you try to develop a drug, it's a process that takes on average 10 years and an investment of 1 to 2 billion. So it's certainly not a one-off experience that you can solve with AI. It's a very iterative approach where we try to leverage small steps in AI to both help, to use it as a platform of collaboration between different expertise domains, to try and make sense of the vast amounts of data, and to try to make important decisions early on. So early onset of decision making in order to optimize the chance of successful work development. And this is exactly like you say, a problem where we need to use AI to kind of augment our decision making, to kind of supplement each step and direct discovery and direct development process in order to optimize the probability of a successful drug on the market.
In a couple of episodes ago, we were talking with Brandon Allgood from Fog Pharma, and he was talking about an active learning based approach whereby you're training models, you're leveraging the insights of those models to direct which real world tests that you're going to execute, and then use that to retrain your models, and then use that again to go in and suggest additional tests. But it seemed like a process that would be very difficult to organically evolve towards if you're a traditional pharmaceutical company, because so much of the drug discovery process is really built around your use of data and AI. I was curious, if you don't have that luxury of starting afresh and being a startup who can go in and do this anew, how are you seeing companies effectively evolve to that, to take the existing process and go in and say, okay, well, we're going to first leverage data and AI in this way, and then we're going to go in and embed it further, and evolve their existing process towards one which is more data and AI centric.
Yes. There are, well, I think two very important aspects here. The first one is that we need to bridge the gaps between different expertise areas. That's something that I mentioned as well, but also between different silos. So typically in drug discovery, you have target discovery. And once you discover a target, you push it to drug discovery. And effectively, if you want to use active learning, you need to combine all those different silos into one system, which allows for an environment where you can effectively use active learning to improve processes not within one department but across department. And that's also an aspect where data management comes into play, and it's very important. So before you can use methodologies as active learning, certainly within larger established organization, often they already have enormous amounts of data separated across different departments. And bear in mind that, well, our biological field has been evolving very fast. So data that has been generated 5 years ago is almost, it's very difficult to compare then to data that is generated today. So you need to make decisions there as well and continuously evolve your data management strategy in order to allow or enable getting insights from all those different data sources so you can use it for an application like active learning. What I want to add as well to the aspect of active learning, using this to systematically improve processes and converge to a solution that you can use for drug discovery or drug development, is that you can leverage AI as well to sample or to derogate experimental design. And not in the sense that you want to converge to an optimal solution, but in the sense that you want to sample from a very broad landscape of different possibilities so that you can learn good and bad examples from an experimental part. And in this way, you increase the scope of different possibilities. As very often within, well, the scientific community, we are driven by positive results, and you're typically driven into a very narrow solution, which can be limiting. As at a certain step, you can discover that, well, this particular solution is not ideal. It has, for example, too much toxicity or adverse effects. So you can still go back and sample from your more diverse landscape multiple possibilities that are not adjacent to each other, in such a way boost creativity or different solutions.
Mm. Well, so it sounds like there's an element whereby we're talking about the data silos that we've always been talking about, both in the life sciences space, but in other industries as well. But it sounds like this is going beyond this in the sense that these are silos that aren't just silos on the data, but they're also silos when it comes to having the tools, being able to do the analysis on that data. So great, we can go, maybe we'd be able to, through force of will, be able to go in and get all of the data that we need. But if we can't analyze that on an ongoing basis, we can't create processes around this. And so we need a more unified data architecture and AI architecture in order to be able to actually go and systematically analyze this end to end and make those better decisions. So it sounds like that was one part of both the challenge and the solution. But it sounds like there's another part, which is even if you are able to break down all of those silos, your own data can lead you astray because you have the information that you have. You don't have information on everything else that's out there, on the other types of tests that you need to be doing, on the other patients that you need to be collecting data from. And so you can't just let, quote unquote, the data speak. You need to be very intelligent about how you're thinking about those gaps in your data and going and understanding the limitations of your data in order to be able to seize those opportunities and go after the patients, the tests that you haven't gone after previously, or in the high value ones that are suggested adjacencies to your existing data.
Well, we recently had a very nice example case study where we kind of implemented some of the problems or technology that we are discussing right now. So very concretely, we were developing a diagnostic test for a client, whereby we had quite a limited data set of about 200 to 300 patients. still significant, as patient data is typically hard to come by. And we obtained a pretty good predictive performance on our biomarker panel for, well, this particular diagnostic test. But we had a little bit of a deeper look into kind of the data, the metadata, and the patient information on which we performed our machine learning algorithm. And what we, for example, identified is that while our general score was quite good, we identified that for certain subpopulations, we had a much lesser performance. And even further, for certain categories like different ethnicities, we weren't able to say anything about predicted performance. And we know that, for example, based, well, of course, on the disease area and the type of drug that you're speaking about, ethnicity can be a predictor for efficiency of successful treatment. So all those pieces of information are basically missing. And while the diagnostic test is very promising and can already be used in practice, the company actually choose to use this information in a form of, well, not really active learning, but in a form that they recognize the shortcomings within the current diagnostic test. They used our inputs to deliberately sample from those subpopulations in order to increase the applicability of the test to, well, a broader population, which is a very nice example on how you should be careful about the unknowns and not assume that, well, all the answers are in the data.
So on the, it's easy for folks to go in and say either I've got tons of data, so I should be able to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning for it, and that's not true because you're even with lots of data, it could still be biased in plenty of different ways. But it sounds like there's also the opposite conclusion, which is, well, I don't feel like I have a whole lot of data, but if you're in a data-rich environment, leveraging AI will enable you to identify, well, what other data should you be going out and going after? So there's a don't get a sense of hubris because you have a lot of data that you're actually going to be able to find quote unquote truth in it. But on the other hand, just because you don't have a whole lot of data or as much data as you think you need up front, leveraging these techniques lets you identify what data you need to collect and get to a faster answer that way. And arguably, by guiding your data collection process, can probably accelerate the time to make that decision. I'm curious, are you seeing indications of folks being able to cut back on that those number of years, the 10, 15 years it takes to develop a new drug by being able to go in and make gating decisions sooner? So being able to say, okay, well, this isn't going to go, we can pretty accurately predict that this isn't going to be successful. So we should kill this before we spend all of this money and the researchers spend all of their years of their lives going down a route which isn't successful, and vice versa. That guides them towards ones that will be.
Well, I truly believe so. The only problem is that, again, kind of drug development is a very long process. So AI has been emerging at a very fast rate, but the actual applications of AI where, well, those kind of results add up to faster drug discovery and drug development needs to build up. However, like it's not always in those very advanced AI analytical application that you can book progress. We always try to identify low-hanging fruits as well. Sometimes those can be very little steps. And to provide you with an example, we identified, for example, for a company where we looked at the whole drug development process and that specific context, which was about biologicals, like biological small compounds that can act as a drug. The typical lead development time, so it's a part of drug discovery and development, but a smaller part, took about 1 to 2 years. After 1 to 2 years, there was a step whereby the compound was being purified. Often, when this step failed, it actually meant that the lead has to be terminated. And efforts of the past 1 to 2 years were not necessarily lost, but at least they didn't end up into a successful drug. So we identified a very small step whereby we reasoned that potentially with the data that the client already had, we can make a small model that can early on predict the probability of a good purification step. And that effectively has proven to be true. Like there was sufficient data. We were able to at least not very accurately predict the success of purification, but within the first 500 lead compounds, provide a ranking of the most probable compounds that will or have the highest probability for a good purification 1 or 2 years down the line. And this is effectively an algorithm that has been put in production with success. And it was a rather small project, I would say, with a very significant impact where we didn't use any very fancy AI machine learning model. It was actually a mix of advanced statistics and some basic machine learning modeling, but still had a very major impact on both cost and efficiency within the company.
I'm curious about the change management of this because at some point there will be an occasion where you're telling a researcher that no, you're going to have to stop pursuing this line of research because the model is, and it's presumably a fairly transparent model in this case, is telling us that really the likelihood of purification at the end of this is just not going to be high enough. So there's really no point in you going down this route. I could imagine there being a lot of pushback from a researcher who spent a lot of their time and effort getting to this point. How do you deal with that human aspect of this, the willingness to go in and adopt the solution afterwards?
It's a very valid point. Something that we also really are not really concerned about, but take into account at least. In this particular case, well, actually, the scientists were happy because, well, they could focus their time on more complex cases on how to improve purification within that step rather than having lost efforts. Education is very important, obviously, to kind of make people understand how to what it actually means having an AI tool in place and what are the consequences. But what I think is even more important is actually understanding the scientists themselves. Like those scientists, they have a lot of knowledge through their experience on how to optimize purification, etc. We use that knowledge actually in our tooling. We leveraged technologies, platforms, and visualizations to make it actually easier for the scientists to do their jobs. In a very similar sense, what we tend not to deliver is just a black box model. So it was effectively a very transparent model where not only the outcome was provided, but the whole reasoning of the machine learning on how a certain outcome, well, why a certain prediction has been made as being explained. And it provides a little bit of a sandbox environment, which is very highly appreciated and enables scientists to kind of experiment. What if we kind of change the conditions a little bit? What would the outcome then be? And it really helps in kind of steering their experimentation, limits the amount of unnecessary work that they have to perform. So in the end, it's a win-win. But that doesn't take away that initially people can shy a little bit from AI and be a little bit skeptical on what it can deliver.
As they should be. But it sounds like I've heard people talk about human centric AI or human centric approach to artificial intelligence. And obviously, there are variations in terms of what folks mean, but that sounds like it's at the core of what's happening here. It's you're looking at how do we leverage their expertise most effectively? How do we make this valuable for them so it improves what they're able to do? But it sounds like there's also this element of how do we make available these tools and techniques and this data for the scientists themselves? So, because they are also interested in leveraging these methods. So, to the degree that we can involve them in the process and give them an education on what it is that we're doing, and also hopefully that they can take this and go in and do their own analysis and build their own models, this becomes really a win-win for everyone. So it sounds like not all use cases are probably going to be like that, but if you can find ones like that, start with those ones, and ideally ones that are going to yield an immediate return. Are you seeing that there's also that this then sparks some kind of a virtuous cycle that they have the success on the low hanging fruit, and that sparks a willingness to go in and say, well, what if we go in and do deeper changes to the way that they're wiggling processes, and this becomes like the first step on the longer journey?
Yes, yes, definitely. So I always think that taking one step at a time is a better approach than try to be very visionary and creative and how we can implement AI. Again, I think the whole industry can benefit from more machine learning AI opportunities or possibilities. And I don't necessarily think it can be with this kind of groundbreaking AIs like you probably heard about AlphaFold or LLMs, but really trying to see how, even with simple modeling, we can improve. Even before that, having a good data management system in place where you have a portal for scientists where they can explore, query, and question data is already very beneficial to a company and can lead to better decision making even prior to AI. And I would say it's actually prerequisite before you can do artificial intelligence. So that's why we effectively try to take it one step at a time, starting from the ground layer before you go to the full-fledged AI applications. And along the way, you're also introducing change management by making the scientists more aware about what you can offer with AI machine learning, how they can use it, and what it could mean for their particular line of work. And what I would like to add as well, it's the educational part often works in two ways as well. It's certainly in our field, there is a lot of knowledge embedded in kind of domain expertise, which typically you don't have as an AI machine learning expert. I'm quite knowledgeable in the limited space of biology, but by no means I'm knowledgeable in all types of oncology and other disease areas as well. So there is a lot of domain expertise that is required within the whole drug development discovery cycle. And you need to educate your AI machine learning expert as well on this domain knowledge in order to provide applications that are actually usable in practice and truly deliver value.
And going to your point that you're making around leveraging generative AI and transformer models, it's an area where so I have spoken to a lot of companies that are making incredible progress going in and fine tuning transformer models to go in and predict the reactions of synthetic proteins and use that for towards developing new proteins for heart disease and diabetes and the like. But those are usually extremely advanced organizations that have been working on this and making incredible investments in their data and AI capabilities on the technology side as well as on the people and process side of things. So not a place where you would start if you're an organization who is looking to leverage your data more effectively. But I'm curious whether or not there are other use cases that are a bit more turnkey. So when think of Gen AI, ways of augmenting researchers so that they're able to, using an LLM, go in and find research reports, summarize those, and do that part of their research process more effectively. So not the actual testing and test management and test decisions, but for the process of knowledge acquisition. So could generative AI be useful for those, but in a much more limited sense than people are often talking about generative AI?
Yes, yes, I definitely think so. We internally use large language models in a certain context, generative AI as well. One to kind of accumulate all this public knowledge out there and try to get novel insights. In that sense, generative AI can also help in kind of thinking a little bit out of the box when you have sufficient data. One of the most difficulties I experience within the field is you need to have sufficient data and you need to have sufficient diverse data prior to kind of leveraging generative AI. Certainly in the spaces of rare diseases, typically the amount of data available and knowledge available is quite limited. So there it becomes more difficult to kind of leverage generative AI applications. That's one thing. And secondly, if even within companies that try to synthesize novel drugs in certain areas, what you tend to see is that those generative AI algorithms come up with solutions within well-known targets or disease areas because, well, you have most data available there. So it's much more easier to be creative. And then you can actually debate whether your generative AI truly comes up with out of the box thinking, or is just providing suggestions in a space that it's already quite well developed. And that's something that I truly think will evolve for the better. We are continuously generating more and higher quality data. So at a certain point, generative AI and large language models will play an important role. That being said, they already play a significant role here in state of the art innovation within different pharma companies as well.
Mm. But if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the takeaways is that you really should not be thinking about generative AI and large language models as a substitute for your domain expertise. If anything, to leverage it effectively, you actually need to have even greater domain and subject matter expertise in order to be able to leverage effectively, because otherwise it's going to lead you astray. It's going to hallucinate. It's going to come up with something that's already quite well known. So you need to have extraordinary domain expertise, but it also sounds like presumably you then also need to have expertise around leveraging generative AI in the right way. It's not exactly solving your talent and expertise challenges, because now you need talent and expertise that is in the intersection of both the domain expertise as well as the ability to use generative AI tools or LLMs.
Yes,
So no magic button or no silver bullet there.
not yet.
Now, would love your thoughts on where this is leading in terms of benefits that folks can expect to see on the life sciences side. So when you were describing these small populations that where you could identify that we didn't have enough information and we needed to go and collect more, and we could target those groups because they're particularly susceptible, this makes me think that these approaches would be particularly beneficial for the development of orphan drugs. For that, so where we could expect through the application of AI more treatments that today are otherwise falling through the cracks, because it would be both we're able to go and target those smaller populations more effectively, and we're also able to develop the drugs more cheaply, so it's more economically viable to go after them. So in terms of like where AI would have the biggest impact in drug discovery, should we be thinking about it that it's moving towards more personalized medicine and more types of treatments for rare diseases than we've ever seen before? Or is that not the case? And actually, it'll be applicable pretty much to every type of new drug or treatment where we're going after. What's your sense of where we can expect the biggest improvement?
I would say everywhere and everything that you've said. Personalized medicine is certainly a very interesting area because we know that each disease is actually individual. We know that, well, if you even have the very same disease, the efficacy of a certain treatment will vary from person to person. Better understanding like where a particular treatment is most beneficial will certainly improve healthcare as a whole. Right now, AI is or and the data that we generate is helping us understand like why um, and which kind of subpopulations or different disease areas are more difficult or have lesser efficient therapies available. And this will also be able to steer us in the right direction and which kind of additional drugs or improved treatment do we need to develop. So, but even in the more established kind of disease areas, well, once a disease is solved, then, well, there's nothing to do about it. It's solved. Even there, you always have different levels of efficiency, and they're trying to see what's the right dose per patient, which treatment or combinations of different treatments can be most beneficial. Will be it's certainly a very interesting area and where we can assist with AI. And in the terms of kind of drugs, like there's certainly a very active area of drug repositioning where you try to reposition or repurpose drugs that are known to work well within one disease areas to others, perhaps rare diseases. I think the rare diseases are also getting more attention because through, well, the additional data that we are generating and our capabilities in AI, it becomes also more feasible to develop drugs within that area as often, well, everything is economical driven in a sense. So it needs to be attractive to develop a drug for a certain disease area or population. And that's because of the efficiency gains through machine learning and AI, we can make more things possible.
Well, certainly right now, I think COVID is still on everybody's mind, and I think folks will be curious. So, presumably, there's going to be another pandemic sooner or later. What would we expect? How should organizations sort of change their processes in order to be able to adapt and develop treatments for that next pandemic faster when it comes? Any thoughts there?
Yes, I'm certainly not an expert on COVID, but I've been working on collaborations where they try to accumulate large genomic data sets from patients all around the world to kind of develop those disease atlases or a COVID atlas on even single cell level and try to understand like what are the mechanisms of action that can cause severe COVID symptoms, mild COVID symptoms, or even long COVID. And now that we better understand kind of the value that such deep molecular data can provide, I think for our next pandemic, we will be faster to kind of resolve to those tool sets. And we also have developed more advanced AI algorithms that can tackle such a complex data set, which will in turn help us both understand the disease, help us act quicker on how we can potentially identify new therapies, and also understand better like how what are the elements causing, for example, severe, mild, or no symptoms at all.
So it's good news for folks who are suffering from long COVID, but also good news for us in the sense of we will be in a better place to go in and respond to the next health crisis, which we know will happen sooner or later. Well, Volodymyr, thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts and insights. If folks want to find out more about you or more about BioLizard, I'm assuming go to your LinkedIn page and the BioLizard website, or is there a better way for folks to get in touch?
Yes. Well, everybody can visit the lizard.bio website, which provides an overview of all the services that we provide. Also have some interesting use cases that I've described, but much more. So that would be the ideal place to visit us. And we also have a very active LinkedIn page where we typically post a lot of different scientific evolutions, innovations, and projects from BioLizard.
Volodymyr, thank you very much for joining us. You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.